We'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, a joint presentation by Datameer and Datacoves. I am Steve Egan. I am the Director of Global Solutions Engineering at Datameer. I've been with the company just over about 10 years now. I'm joined today by Noel Gomez. Noel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm Noel Gomez. I'm the co-founder of Datacoves, and we have a platform that we'll discuss during this seminar. We've been also doing a lot of consulting in analytics, in the analytics space, and I have a lot of experience working in large enterprises, improving their data management practices.
Okay, just some logistics to talk about. Everyone will be muted for the session. If you'd like to ask questions at any time, there is a Q&A button on your Zoom bar. So you can feel free to ask questions at any point during the session, and then we will have a Q&A session at the end. So just brief agenda. So what we'll do is we'll go into just an introduction and overview of Datameer and Datacoves, a few slides. And then we'll go into an end-to-end demonstration of the two technologies so that you can see how they work together seamlessly. And then we'll have a session at the end for Q&A. So at this point, I will turn it back over to Noel so that he can give us an overview of Datacoves.
All right. So the problem we're solving with Datacoves is really trying to think about the experience that end users have or an organization has, looking at how you get from raw data to actionable insights. And right now, there's been a revolution in how tools are implemented in this space. There used to be a single tool that will do everything. And what has happened over the years is companies have specialized to improve each part of the process, from ingesting data, transforming data, and visualizing and analyzing data. But that creates a lot of friction because people need to figure out which tools to select. There are hundreds of tools to choose from. It's a difficult landscape, a lot of evaluation and things that need to be done. And so we're trying to simplify that. Once you figure out which tools you're going to use, now you have to integrate them. How do you connect them? How do you host it? Managing all the infrastructure, et cetera. It's a hard thing to do. And you need to think about issues around security. How do people authenticate? Are you using single sign-on? How do you offboard people, et cetera? And then finally, and this is where Datameer comes in, there's a lack of integrated no-code solutions for the less, the non-technical users, let's say. And so what we're trying to do is connect everything because this is too difficult. So we'll see here with Datacoves, what we have done is figured out how we can bundle all the different pieces using off-the-shelf open source solutions, but with an opinionated approach. So we have a tool called AirByte for extracting and loading data. We then use a tool called dbt for transformation. We will show you this during the demo. We have another tool called Superset for visualizing, and then we use Airflow for orchestrating. And figuring out all of these tools, how they all integrate, managing all the infrastructure is difficult. But in addition to that, you need to think about how are you going to manage this? Can you audit this? Are you securing? Are you governing everything? And so for that, we implement what's called data ops, which is a lot of automation and validation of the process before changes are rolled out to production. So the idea is that you develop in an isolated environment, you test in an isolated environment, and you validate before you release to production so that you make sure that production never breaks. So with Datacoves, as I mentioned, we have all these tools, AirByte, dbt, Airflow, and Superset, and we're managing all that infrastructure, but we have customers who choose to use other tools that we don't host, for example, Fivetran or Looker. And so we can turn on and off different components depending on the needs of the organization. Then, as I mentioned, we have the data ops process using Git. So one of the goals that we're trying to do with all of this is really treat analytics just like software development is done. So follow software development best practices for analytics processes. And so that's where data ops comes in, and governance and security. And then all of this information is then happening, the actual data and the actual transformations all happen in Snowflake. And we'll see that during the demo.
Okay, great. Thanks, Noel. So I'll talk a little bit about Datameer. So what is Datameer? So Datameer is an application that sits natively on your cloud data warehouse on Snowflake, and we really have four facets that I'll talk about. So the first is we bring in a metadata layer into your Snowflake environment so that you can search and discover, your assets. So Datameer will introspect your Snowflake data warehouse. It will build an inventory of assets of all your tables and views to allow easy discovery and searchability of those assets, as well as to, as I said, bring in that semantic layer so you can add in descriptions, tags, custom attributes, to allow for, first of all, finding the assets of interest and then sharing what you've done. Core capabilities, data preparation and analysis and transformation. So we offer a no-code and low-code interface to do data discovery and transformations. That's why it fits so nicely with the Datacoves framework, is because we allow that persona to come in and do that self-service discovery and prototyping. And then finally, we were able to, document and then share those insights. So as I said, okay, I've got my transformation in place. Let's document what I've done, adding in these semantic attributes and then sharing that out, and then finally deploy. So business users can deploy their assets to Snowflake. We'll see that in action, deploy it, as a viewer table to be additionally validated and consumed, by the BI tools. And then finally, as we'll see in this scenario, we will productionalize with Datacoves. A little bit of the problem statement. So without Datameer in play, this is the overall analytics process. So an end user, an analyst has a new business question of data that's in Snowflake. So typically they have to communicate those requirements to data engineering, and then data engineering has to go and code that and then come back to the business analyst and said, hey, this is what I think you wanted. Is this actually what you wanted? If it's not, then we have to go through that iteration again. It's not uncommon that it's not. It is challenging sometimes to communicate requirements from business to data engineering. Once we do have that validated, then okay, great. Then we can visualize and consume with our BI or data science tools. However, these are very lengthy iterations. So what Datameer aims to do is to greatly reduce that time to new insight for business. So in that they can use our self-serve environment to come in and do that discovery and prototyping on their own, do the no-code transformations, discoveries, validate that within Datameer, and then finally get to a point where I'm like, oh, hey, this is exactly what I need. But chances are they got there a lot faster because they're able to do it themselves. And then, okay, now I've got SQL, because Datameer generates SQL. So we can hand the SQL over to data engineering, which will exactly define all the requirements within that SQL statement, and then it can further be productionalized, and then finally, again, consumed in more of an enterprise dashboard setting. But again, greatly reducing that time to insight and thus lowering costs. And that's what you're going to see in action today. So let's jump, well, first let's talk about the kind of how everything fits together. And I'll talk about the Datameer aspect. So this is the overall modern data stack, data analytics stack. And on the bottom, we have Datameer. So we just plug right into the stack, right on top of your Snowflake. Once the data is in Snowflake, hey, then we're able to do that self-service data prototyping, ad hoc discovery, and business validation. So it's a great fit. And then Noel, if you wanted to say a few words about, the Datacoves portion of the stack.
Yeah, so the top part of this, we see that we use the AirByte tool to take any number of sources, and I'll show this during the demo, and get that data over into Snowflake. Once we have the data in Snowflake, we use a tool called dbt, which is allowing us to transform the data using standard SQL and a couple of little enhancements that they've done. dbt fits in very well with the, like I was mentioning, the software development best practices. But dbt allows you to do more than just transform the data. We can also capture the documentation, which I'll show. You can add testing, so data quality testing, and you even get the lineage. And so you're getting a lot of benefits by having a tool like dbt in this process. And then finally, once you have the transformations done and everything tested and deployed, we use a tool called Airflow to orchestrate the process. So Airflow, what Airflow allows us to do is to say, load these sources at a certain time, and once those are done loading, transform the data. So it's managing that process. It could also manage doing additional pieces. It could be refresh a machine learning model or push data to some other system, some other API, for example, pushing data back up to your CRM. And then finally, we also host Superset. So once you have your data in Snowflake, you want to create dashboards and reports, and that's where Superset comes in. So we're handling all of that infrastructure at the top. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of complexity. This is where IT would come in. And so what we're playing the role of with Datacoves is managing that top part, and then Datameer comes in at the bottom with that last mile, getting those last users who are less technical to come in and be able to do their transformations and take something from an idea to hard requirements that then can be passed to IT, which I'll be playing in this role.
Great, thanks. And this is what we're going to show you. So this is the joint Datacoves Datameer demo, and we're going to start with loading data from S3 with AirByte. And then we will do the initial unpackaging of that data. So we're going to transform that into a Snowflake table. And then, like I said, we'll plug in Datameer, do the business user discovering and prototyping. And then finally, we will do that handover to IT and then further productionalize. So let us jump straight into it. And we should start, as I always like to start, with a picture. So this is my operational dashboard going against my Snowflake data warehouse. And this is going to be a customer finance use case. And so here's the end result, right? I've done some various roll-ups of my customer loans by loan grade, the total loan amount, the loan purpose, employment type, some in-depth dives on the grade verification. So this is great. It's all set up. But like I said, with the nature of analytics, analysts are really, well, they're never happy. You give them an answer and they just ask 5 more questions. And me playing the role of an analyst has a new question, such as I would like to see a distribution of the high-risk loans. That's my business question, kind of a heat map, and show me where all the high-risk loans are distributed. Problem is, that data, to answer that question, may not even be in Snowflake. And furthermore, once it's in Snowflake, then I've got to go through discovering, coding, preparing, transforming that data. So that's where that, I've got to bring in data engineering to just help me just get started and prototype and ultimately answer that business question. But that's the question that we're going to answer right now in just about 20 minutes live from end to end. We'll start with data in S3, and we're going to finish with that end result of that dashboard of the heat map, and then we'll productionalize. But first thing, starting in the beginning of the end-to-end process, is to start with data integration and loading that. So at this point, I will hand it over to Noel, and he can start with loading the data and integrating that into Snowflake.
All right, thank you. So here we have the Datacoves platform. And as Steve said, the first thing we want to do is load some data. So we go to the load tab here. We're going to go to add a new source. And in this case, it is a file. This case, we happen to have a file that is publicly hosted on S3. If we had a file that needed credentials, we could do that as well. So in this case, I'm going to place the URL. It's this zip coordinates that Steve would have told me we needed to load for some reason. Here we have the different data types that we can load. In our case, we just need a CSV. And this is what the final table is going to be called. So essentially that's a data set name. Once I do this, and you'll see how simple this is. It's not a lot of information that I have to put in here. What AirByte is now doing is validating that it can reach that file, it can read it, etc. And in a second now it will complete. And now it's going to ask me, where do I want to drop this data? So in our case, we're going to drop it into Snowflake. And so now what it's doing is it's actually scanning the file, figuring out the different columns that exist in the file. And in a second here, it'll ask me now to finish the configuration. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to define that we don't want the AirByte tool to handle the scheduling. We will do that with Airflow later. So I'll send this to manual. Here, I'm going to define what database schema this data should go into. And I want it to go to the loan schema. And then finally, here you can actually see all the columns that were in that file. And finally, right here, we want the data to be delivered in raw data. So I'll show this in the next step. But what's important here is that data changes over time. And traditionally, what would happen is if this file, we can see here, it has 3 columns. If tomorrow we get a 4th column, the loading step will break because the destination table will only have 3 columns and now it has 4. Instead of doing it that way, the more robust approach is to load all the data into one field. And Snowflake has the data type called variant. And so we just convert everything to a JSON field, and then we will use dbt in the next step to flatten it. But that's what this is all about. And I'll show you that in the next step. So now that we have connected our source to our destination, all we have to do is start the sync. So this is going to take a minute. While that's happening, let me go back and just show all the different connectors that exist here. So you can, Zendesk, Facebook, Google Ads. And what's great about this tool is, as you saw how simple that was, it's just as simple to do other types of connectors. So you just need credentials. Depending on which connector you select, you will be asked to authenticate with that tool. And you see, I didn't have to create any tables in my destination. AirByte's going to take care of all of that for me. So if I go back, let me cancel this here. And that data is loaded. Here it is, that zip coordinates. And so now the data is loaded, but it's still not available to Steve. And because we did that variant column, we need to clean up that data. But before I do that, I want to show that one thing that we try to do in looking at the scope of this is to think about the whole process. There's more to an analytics end-to-end process than just transforming data or just loading data. We need to think about security. We need to think about orchestration, storing the configuration for disaster recovery. Up here, we have the CI/CD scripts, etc. So there's many aspects to think about. So that data that we're going to load is going to land in this L1 layer here. And if we look here right now, we only have a single table. There it is. So this is the one that exists. And now I will go and create what's necessary to bring in the second table. And you'll see here in a second, what this command is doing is it's going and inspecting to see what's new in this schema in the database. And I will now select the loan schema. And that table already exists. So I'm selecting the second one. And here's where now it realizes that we have that JSON column. So we want it to get flattened. And finally, this is asking me if I want to update this table, and I do. And so there it is. It added this new row. And so somebody would come in here and you can see how the documentation is coming into play. So you can say zip geo info. These 2 green files are the other ones that got created. And so here's what dbt again has done or needs. And we will see here that I can again put the zip geo flattened because now this is going to break it up into the individual columns, which I'll show in the next step. The other thing that you could do here as a user, you can add tests and you can say this is not null. So the point is, there's over 70 tests that come out of the box with dbt and the surrounding open source ecosystem. So now that we have that all set up, here we can see that, again, we have that script generate all of this for us automatically. And if I just do a preview here, we can see what the data looks like when it first gets loaded by AirByte. So you'll see here in a second that the data comes in as a single column. So you can see here, everything is together in the single AirByte column. If I unselect that and run it again, we'll see that this is what it looks like later. So this is what Steve needs. He needs it to be separate columns, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'll remove this. My next step would be to run this. And when I do this, it will materialize this object in the data warehouse. And now it's going to be available for Steve. So this will finish here in a second, and then we can hand it back over to Steve. So there we go. It's creating it. And there it is. It completed successfully. All right, Steve.
Great. Now I have my tables. And now I can go in and do that discovery and prototyping. So now we're in Datameer. And so here's all of our schemas and tables that we have available. And here's those tables that were just loaded. So the first thing I would do is bring those tables into my Datameer workspace. And so as we add that asset to the workspace, a couple things to note here. First is we can see a preview of the data. So Datameer is very interactive. So it means that you define and apply your transformations, your data preparation. We always convert that to SQL and run that on Snowflake. And so it's very interactive. So you could see a preview of the data as well as profiling. So we can go and profile any of these columns. And we've really optimized this experience for the end user. Meaning that users typically only want to profile a few columns. So these are user directed. Yes, profile that to keep the design experience here very fast and interactive. And so here we can see the annual income field fully profiled. We've got a bit of data skew here. Looks like most of our incomes, of course, in the 0 to 200,000 or so range. And we've got a few outliers here. So I want to normalize this a little bit and remove some of this skew. So I'm going to start with our no code transformations. So as I bring those up, these are the most common operations that analysts will apply. And so we made them very easy to apply. Joins, unions, aggregates. I'm going to do and apply a filter. So when I select filter, I'm just going to say, make sure that my annual income is less than, and we'll put 2 million or so that we can remove that skew. And when I hit apply, and I could put in multiple filtering criteria in there and apply again, then I can reprofile that field and I can see how the transformation influenced the distribution of the annual incomes that I have within my data set. So looking a little better, reduce some of that data skew. So going back to the data preview, I can look and discover some of the other columns. So for example, if I look at the zip code of the customer loans, it looks like the last couple numbers of that zip code is hashed out. So I would like to derive a new column that just contains the first 3 numbers of that zip code. And so for that, I'm going to do a column extraction. And so here we present you a wizard-like UI to say what is the new column that you would like to derive. We'll call that zip, and then we'll say what is the length of the string that you want to derive into that new column. And so that will, and it's always visually documented along the way. So every step that I do, I can easily see, what's going on here and the order that these operations were applied. And then I could see, oh, how does my column look? And there is my newly transformed column called zip that contains the first 3 numbers. Another thing we offer is a low-code interface. So we offer a formula builder. And so when I bring up our formula builder, this is a way where we can apply Snowflake functions. And it's really on a columnar basis. So on the right here, you'll see all of Snowflake's functions. 100% of those you can use here, as well as user-defined functions. But instead of having a large, SQL statement with lots of functions embedded in there, we're able to, again, easily apply these on a columnar basis. So I can start typing the function in here, and then we have the IntelliSense autocomplete editor that will bring up and search the list of functions and return the ones that are matching here, as well as the method signature here, so that I can then easily click and apply, and it'll build that for me. And I could say, let's just take the left 4, characters of that, and then, intermediately apply that. And here I can do a number of things. I can combine and nest functions together. But again, having those on a nice, columnar way, very easy to maintain. So also I can, let's say, hey, let's concatenate a hyphen, and then I can type in columns as well. So we bring up the list of valid columns that I have available to me. So again, interactively apply that. We have a magic format button where it will kind of format that. Less applicable here, it's a nice simple formula, but we'll go ahead and apply that, and then that will add that and document that step in my lineage flow here. So now we want to join and enrich this data set with the zip coordinates that you saw that were loaded by Noel here, ready for me to use. And so I'm going to elect to do a join, and I'm going to join this with the zip coordinates. I will add that to my project workspace. So again, and I can add that via the plus sign, or I can simply drag and drop those tables in there. But now I'm going to go ahead and join those together. I will select the zip coordinates, and our approach is we offer the ability to get suggestions. So here I'm leveraging that. Of course, I can always choose the columns manually, but here we're like, okay, let's go out and find columns that might join together by running some metrics on those. We can look at the column names, data types, and as well as run similarity metrics on the actual content of the column, so that we can give you scores. And this really does find the most relevant columns to join on most of the time, really validating my assumptions. Okay, so here we noticed the zip code, the zip column has a higher match than before I transform that. So I'm going to select the column with the higher match, and then I can go in a little bit further and actually debug this join. So this is a preview of the join, and I could say, well, what rows, didn't match? What keys that I have did not match that? And so that will show me the keys that did not match, and as well as it'll show me what keys did match and how many times did they match. And we're also enhancing this with a nice visual diagram as well, so you can see the inflow to your join and then the outflow. Do I have no data coming out? Do I have a massive Cartesian product coming out? Am I about to use 100 credits on my Snowflake instance, validating this join? That's another real value out of Datameer I can talk about for a second, is that if I'm working with large tables here, Datameer will automatically utilize Snowflake's native sampling, so that transparent to the user, when I'm designing my join, if it's a deep table like 100 million rows, will automatically switch to Snowflake sampling. Number one, saving you time. It's going to be a lot faster to define and validate that join off the sampling. Second, of course, you can minimize the amount of credits that you use in design mode. Of course, when we deploy and productionalize, it's always processed, against the entire table. Another aspect that we have is the ability to do data exploration within Datameer. So of course, this isn't BI that I'm about to show you, right? That we're going to leverage to Superset to do our operational dashboards. But let's say I want to do some quick, ad hoc discovery of what we got. So we allow you to bring in dimensions and measures within Datameer to do that validation. So let's say I want to bin up my annual income into $20,000 blocks and overlay that with the loan status. And then my compute is going to be the interest rate, and then I'm going to average that out to really discover, these patterns in the data. And let's see, those dimensions and measures, and even come up with a little visualization. Again, this isn't meant to be my dashboard, but it is meant to, bring some visuals in so I can do this visual discovery, without, having to export that every time. So bring that into the tool to be able to do that. So going back, I do want to now deploy this. Now that I've done some, data prep on packaging, I now can deploy this to Snowflake to be further validated, in my BI tool to really come up with that report of the heat map. What I'm going to do first, though, is reduce the number of columns here. So this is a bit of a wide data set. So I'm just going to add in, because I'm going to materialize this, and I'm going to only materialize the most pertinent columns. We'll do the interest rate, and then of course the geo coordinates, right, that we joined in from that other source. So this is my finalized data source here. I can always get a sneak preview of the SQL. So there's that SQL preview. This is what we're going to write to Snowflake. So once I hit deploy, we're actually going to write this SQL to Snowflake as a view. And that's key, because when we hand off to Noel and IT, they have all the SQL right there, right? It'll already be written out as that view. And the user experience to deploy is, I could say, let's go ahead and deploy this as a view. We will call this loans geo, and then I can choose the schema that I want to deploy that to. I can also deploy that, as a table. But like I said, in this case, my use case is, hey, I want to validate this further, in my superset. Let's go ahead and deploy that as a view. So now that view is now written into Snowflake. You can see it right here. And then we can now go into, this is Superset. This is our BI tool. And now I can create this new chart, and my data set is now available to Superset because it had been deployed to Snowflake. And then I can choose the visualization that I want. We'll go ahead and create that. And now I can pull in those new attributes, which is the latitude, longitude, and then we can run that query. And then that should be our heat map of the distribution of loans. But we did want the high risk loans. That was the initial use case, right? So I could say, show me the loans that have an interest rate greater than 15%, and then that will filter those out. And okay, here is my heat map of my high risk loans. Again, put together from a business user persona to allow me to go into Snowflake, discover that. Now that I've got that, validated it, okay, now I'd like to transfer ownership of that to IT and productionalize that a bit further. So at this point, we will see that in action. We'll hand that back over to Noel.
All right, thanks. So let me take this back. All right, so this is where we left off. We had created those tables, and what we saw was something that traditionally would have been very hard, because if Steve had to give me all of those requirements and we'd have to iterate back and forth, it could have taken a long time. Well, by enabling him to do this, we shortened that cycle. But the business doesn't necessarily want to run these things. They don't want to monitor these going forward, orchestrate them, make sure that the data has been refreshed, et cetera. So this is why this information needs to come back into IT. So one thing I'll show you here while Steve was talking, I came in here and added the descriptions to these columns. So this will come into play later. Here, this is where I will add the new model. So this is sort of like our Marts layer, let's say. So if I come back to Snowflake, here is the view that Steve created. If I get the view definition, it looks pretty much what he showed on the screen. So I'm going to take this as the actual view definition that I need. I'm going to copy that, come back over here, and now I'm going to create the new table. or sorry, the new model that we will store this information. So I'm going to call it again, loans geo.sql. And now I will paste that in. Now, from an IT perspective, all of these underlines, it doesn't follow our coding conventions. That's essentially what we're seeing. But we want to make sure that this does. And so we have accelerators for that. So if I click that button, it cleans this all up. Now, this is the hard-coded value, essentially pointing back to stuff that Steve was using. We don't want to do that. We want to make sure that dbt manages these things dynamically. That's another feature of dbt, that it can point to different databases and schemas depending on whether you're in the development, in the test, or in the production environment. So that's what we're doing by changing this from to this ref. I'm referring to that those models that existed in that first layer 1. And there's the other model. And now I can preview this. And there's the data. So this is actually what was feeding Steve's visualization. And so the other thing that we want to do now is run this again. So now this is going to materialize this new model into the data warehouse. And this is, we've essentially taken the requirements that would have been taken a long time, and he's giving me exactly what he wants. And that made my life a lot easier because I don't have to decipher what he would have wanted. I actually have the real SQL that was needed. And so now that we have this, the other thing that I can do is, because I put in that documentation, I will generate the dbt documentation. And so with this command, it'll take all that information, like what we were looking at here, these descriptions, and we also now have the lineage information, etc. So all of that kind of stuff will now show up for us in this next tab. So this is the dbt documentation. Think about this as a data catalog being built from the code as we're doing it. So if I look here for that zip coordinates file that we initially did, so you can see there's that model, and here are those descriptions that I put in. And you can see here, there's a test that I had put in when we first started. So you can see all this information, but more importantly, this is great, but what happens when something goes wrong? Well, we can actually see the lineage. So we can see these green nodes are our sources. And in this case, I know it happens to be this node. So let me just focus on this. And so there's the customer loans, and it depends on these other tables and intermediate tables and all this kind of stuff. So it just shows that you can do impact analysis. So if there's an issue with this table, you know what it's going to impact at the other end. More importantly, we can actually get information about this visualization here, that we can say, well, that dashboard is owned by Steve, and I could even get to that dashboard. So again, it's connecting the process end to end, and that's what we're doing there. And the last thing I want to show is the orchestration. So with the orchestration, what we're doing here is we are making sure that we run the data load and then the transformation. So this is everything that we wanted to show, and I'll hand it back over to Steve.
All right, sounds good. So we are at the Q&A portion. I see some questions coming in. Of course, feel free to ask any questions in that Q&A button located on your Zoom bar. First question coming in, can you insert custom Python development inside this cloud stack? If so, where would that go? Noel, I think that's a good one for you to take.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So there's actually two ways that we can do this. So dbt, recently with the latest release of dbt, now supports what are called Python models. So just like I was doing SQL, you can also write Python. And in Snowflake, the great thing now with Snowpark, you can push down that compute down to the Snowflake level. And that's one way that you can do it using dbt. With Datacoves, we also have the ability to install any number of Python libraries, etc. We ship with a bunch of them pre-installed just to make that experience simpler for the end user. And one of those is actually Snowpark. So without using dbt, I can create a Snowpark file or a Python file with utilizing the Snowpark library and use the data frames and even create UDFs, so user-defined functions, push them back. Imagine I can create some sort of prediction model or something like that, push it back to Snowflake, and that actually then becomes available to Datameer. So that's how we can wrap this back up together.
Yeah, and just further to add some context from the Datameer aspect, like you were saying, Noel, in that formula editor or even the SQL editor that I didn't show, you can reference any function that's valid within Snowflake, and of course that includes all of the standard ones, but as well as the user-defined ones in Python, as well as any of the standard Snowflake SQL and functions. Okay, another question coming in. You mentioned sampling in Datameer. How does that work, with the sampling versus the full data, and when is each one being used? So yeah, good question. So as I mentioned, as you're doing your transformations and your design within Datameer, if the table's below a certain threshold, we will always run those queries against the full table and then return the results. You can see, how that's how your transformations are influencing the data. But like I said, if your tables are past a certain threshold, that's where a real value add of Datameer comes in, is that, we will transparently switch to the Snowflake native sampling, so that, number one, your design experience can be nice and fast and interactive. And like I said, second, saving costs. You'd be surprised when designing joins, if you're joining by the wrong columns, how quickly you can explode your data set and your query is going to be sitting there running for an hour. So like I said, this will allow you to validate that and get to that endpoint much faster, after a few seconds. Oh, I've got 40,000 rows in my sample. The result of my join when I only had 1,000 or so rows to start with. So, I'm doing something to explode it out, or I've got nothing coming out here, no results. And like I said, we're going to be adding in visual capabilities around that too, so you can see like a scan key of what's going on. Additionally, you can always elect to do the calculations on the full data. So if I click calculate or profile or the explore, so those kind of user-directed direct queries are always against the full data set. The nice thing is that they are user-directed, so we're not automatically going to do those calculations. So again, always optimizing the design experience, having the user be able to say, yeah, profile that column, show me the totals, that sort of thing, to keep that nice and fast and interactive. Okay, another question coming in. So with the Datacoves stack, what if I have Tableau, already in place, or Fivetran? How would that fit with the stack? I'll hand that to Noel.
Thanks. So we actually, the way that we think about Datacoves is, if you're coming in and you don't have anything, we'll give you everything out of the box. But as Steve said, there are companies out there who already have existing tooling for visualization or even for data loading. So we have customers who are using Looker or Tableau or Click. All we have to do is, we turn off that capability if we're not using it. And, like I said, it's to us, the idea is to create that flexibility for you, to create the integration. So even if you're using Tableau, we can bring back that metadata or push metadata or orchestrate refreshing a hyper extract. So that's what we want to think about, is how do we integrate all these different pieces, whether we're hosting them or not.
Okay, great. Looks like one more question coming in. How are the join suggestions calculated? So I'll take that one. Within Datameer, so when you're designing your join, you can, like I said, first you can select one or more column sets, so you can do multiple column sets of joins, and you can also configure also inner, outer, left, right join, as well as, like I said, that get suggestions button. And I said more often than not, you can leverage that, just depending on how structured and refined your data is. We'll typically discover the correct keys, but give you the ordered list to try really, validating whatever assumptions you may have about the underlying tables, using three things, right? So we look at the column names, we look at the data types, and then we actually scan the contents of the column, so that you may be able to find matches where they're, named something different. And then you could test those validations, so you can design the join with that column. Oh, and then use the debugging, right? Oh, I've got no rows coming out of that, or oh, I'm exploding my join out, and then try some different keys. So, again, keeping that design environment nice and interactive. We've got unions in there too. We've got a nice way of doing unions. Unions can get a little tricky with lining up columns and data types, and a lot of times they're adding new columns in there. We've got a nice visual flow editor for doing unions as well. Okay, looks like that's it for the questions. Thanks everybody for the questions. Couple of next steps up there on the screen. You can visit both Datameer and Datacoves. Datameer, you can go and start up a free trial. A few clicks, you can be up and going, and you can visit Datacoves site as well to see how to leverage, that full cloud stack. But that brings us to the end of the webinar. So again, thanks everybody for coming out, for the questions. This webinar will also be sent out via recording. And everybody have a good day. Thank you.